Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of Deadly Vengeance by Anise Storm, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Prologue, Giselle. Palermo, Sicily. The voices around me echoed in my head. I was becoming increasingly afraid because every second I sat here, I knew it was another that would allow me to be found. I wasn't completely sure whether or not Andrea Catalano even knew where I was, but I could take no chances when it came to him and his violent family. They were the very reason I was leaving the only home I had ever really known for a place I'd never been to. Fleeing to America was scary enough, but knowing what I was taking with me made that terror grow even more. I was nothing more than a thief in the night, or so it seemed. I wasn't running off with some materialistic bauble, or even their cold, hard cash, though. I had something much more priceless with me, something that neither fear nor money could buy. My hand drifted down to my burgeoning belly momentarily before I snatched it away. I had taken many risks when it came to protecting this babe, and I just had to keep reminding myself not to draw any undue attention to myself. If anyone happened upon me, I needed them to see a young girl embarking on a weekend trip to visit her elders. Thank God for Nano and Nana. I knew that their allowing me to come live with them was a big risk, and this favor would be one I'd be sure to repay. I couldn't have anyone recognize me as being pregnant, especially those in the same circles as ours, because they would tell my lover who'd forced me to stay here in Palmero. I kept my head down and continued staring at the carpeted floor. The shoes I'd chosen to wear were a pair of well-worn sneakers, and they would be needed if I had to run. Everything about me now was a sharp contrast to what had once been. In the beginning of my courtship with Andrea, I had loved parading around in a sexy attire, including stilettos. My wardrobe had outfits which had fit me like a glove. It certainly hadn't been for what I it certainly hadn't been what I had had on the night I'd met my former lover, Andrea Catalano. It had been at a nightclub frequented by his family where I'd been chatting casually with my friends until he walked in. From the moment I first laid eyes on him, I was enamored. Our gazes met, and he'd come over to introduce himself, and the two of us had hit it off right away. It'd been the classic boy meets girl story, only ours wouldn't have a happy ending. Our courtship was a whirlwind at the time, and I'd ignored the advice of everyone I knew until it was almost too late. He's bad news, Giselle, my best friend had told me. You're only going to get your heart broken, another one had said. He's dangerous, Al. He's a gangster, my best friend's husband had added. I hadn't cared because I'd been in love. The man was everything I could have asked for, especially when it came to looks. He was over a foot taller than me, and he had the darkest hair and eyes I'd ever seen on a man. When he held me in his arms and later took me to his bed, I'd never felt safer or more cherished. Then everything changed. One of his brothers had been brutally murdered via a car bombing by a rival mafia family, and the explosion blew up more than the expensive sports car. It finally destroyed any fantasies I had of ever being able to live a normal life with the man I loved, especially since I was no longer sure he felt the same way about me that I did about him. When it came to Andrea, I would have allowed him to do anything to me, and for a while I had. The way he'd so expertly commanded my body scared me more now than it had back then. He would touch me with such tenderness one moment and then fuck me brutally in the next. I'd begun to crave the physical pain, but not the mental anguish I'd eventually felt when I learned that I wasn't the only woman in his life. In our circle, others had heard about Viviana Spardo. She wasn't often seen, but rumor was that all of the Catalana brothers passed her between themselves as she satisfied their sick and perverse needs. I wanted to be the one to do that for my lover, only he wouldn't let the putana go. It had been her or me, and he'd made his choice. Now I had to make mine. There was no longer any reason to stay and fight for him because I'd gotten something more from Andrea than just a broken heart. He'd given me the literal gift of life. This child growing inside of me was now my only focus. I didn't give a damn about the gangster lifestyle or even his cruel, twisted needs. Would he easily forget how readily I'd been to satisfy those pervasions? Yes, and it would only continue to hurt me. He'd only turn his eyes back on me when he'd realize what he'd left behind. I'd never know a moment's peace, and this child would be raised in his image. There was every chance that the babe would be ripped from my arms completely. No, as long as I was in the city, he would find me. It was the reason I needed to leave. If he knew what I was harboring inside of me, he would await the birth, then get rid of me so he could bring his heir up the same way he'd been raised. I won't allow it. I can't. I had been faced with a dilemma, and there had only one solution. The determination to provide a normal life for this babe was what made me ultimately reach out to the only family I had who could help. My maternal grandparents had fled to New Orleans decades earlier, and now I was going to follow suit. The plan seemed easy enough. I'd packed a small bag as if I were just leaving town for a short trip. Only I would never return to this godforsaken place again. I'd get to America, find a job, then buy anything else I might need for me and my child. So far, everything was working out exactly as planned. And that's what scared me the most. I was petrified Andrea would somehow find out what I was up to and do whatever necessary to keep me here. It didn't matter that I'd made sure no one knew of this pregnancy. A shiver racked me, and I looked up just as someone sat in the chair beside me. Straightening instantly, I turned and saw an elderly man. I didn't think this was one of Andrea's goons, but rather just another passenger waiting for our gate zone to be called. Boarding would begin soon, and it would be the first part of a very long journey. From Sicily, I would go to Munich, then Chicago, before finally landing in New Orleans. Nano and Nana lived in a part of the French Quarter, once dubbed Little Palermo, due to the influx of Sicilian immigrants that had descended upon the city in the late 1800s. I would simply blend in with everyone else, and none would be the wiser. Good morning, passengers. This is the pre-boarding announcement for Lufthansa's flight LH1917 from Palmero to Munich. At this time, we would like to invite those passengers with. As the gate attendant droned on with the announcement, I took a deep breath before rising to my feet. I was so close to freedom and a life both with and without love. I would no longer have the man I had given my heart to, but I would soon have a child who would heal the broken pieces inside of me as he taught me to love once more. All I had to do was put one foot in front of the other. I took the first step toward the gate, then another, before finally flashing my ticket and boarding the plane. I had made it. My hand drifted back to my belly, and I smiled. Although it was bittersweet, this life of mine was over, but a new one would soon begin.